Origin Series. Part 2, The Akkadian Empire, Sargon's World. Chapters 1 to 8. Circa 2334 to 2154 BC. Introduction. In the last part, we saw the birth of civilization in Sumer, the first cities, the invention of writing, the royal tombs of yore, the Epic of Gilgamesh. Sumerian culture was magnificent, sophisticated, and politically chaotic. A dozen city-states competed for dominance, none able to hold power for long. That was about to change. Around 2334 BC, a man appeared from the north, a Semitic-speaking outsider, a cupbearer to a Sumerian king, who would unite Mesopotamia for the first time in history and create the world's first empire. His name was Sargon. And his story is one of the most extraordinary in all of antiquity. Chapter 1, The World Before AKKAD. The Sumerian city-states of the early dynastic period were individually brilliant and collectively exhausted. Lagash had fought Umma for generations over a strip of agricultural land. Kish fought Uruk. Ur fought everyone. The temple estates were depleted. The farmers were conscripted. The trade networks were disrupted. Around 2350 BC, a king named Lugal-Zagesi of Umma had conquered most of Sumer and claimed an empire stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean. He boasted of ruling from the Lower Sea to the Upper Sea. His empire lasted 25 years. He had no new system, only the same dominance by force, the same cycle of conquest and rebellion. The world was ripe for something different. The Akkadians were a Semitic-speaking people who had lived alongside the Sumerians for centuries, trading, intermarrying, absorbing. They spoke a language in the same family as modern Arabic and Hebrew. They had adopted Sumerian writing, Sumerian religion, and Sumerian art. Within a generation of conquering Sumer, they would be more Babylonian than the Babylonians. But they brought something the Sumerians had never managed, the will and the method to hold an empire together. Chapter 2, Sargon of AKKAD. His birth legend says his mother was a high priestess who could not keep him. She placed him in a basket of rushes, sealed the lid with bitumen, and set him on the river. He was found by a gardener named Akki, who raised him as his own son. The story echoes across 4,000 years to the infant Moses in the bulrushes. Whether it is history or mythology, it established an archetype that would never fade, the great man who rises from nothing. The historical Sargon served as cupbearer to King Yorzababa of Kish. The sources are coy about exactly how he overthrew his master: betrayal, divine favor, sheer force, probably all three. He founded a new city called AKKAD, the location of which archaeologists have never conclusively identified, and he began his campaigns. First he defeated Lugal-Zagesi, crushing him and his coalition of 50 city-state kings in a single campaign. He washed his weapons in the Persian Gulf, the traditional gesture marking the southern limit of his new empire. Each defeated king was paraded in a neck stock through the gate of the god Enlil at Nippur. The message was unmistakable: there was a new order. Then he pushed west. Through Syria to the Cedar Forest and the Silver Mountain, the Lebanon Range and the Taurus. He may have reached Anatolia. He may have reached Cyprus. He boasted that ships from the Indus Valley, from Oman, and from the Gulf docked at AKKAD's quays. For the first time in history, one man claimed dominion over the known world. He ruled for approximately 55 years. He suppressed 3 major revolts, the last in his old age. He survived them all. When he died, he was the most powerful man in the world, and he immediately became a legend. Chapter 3, Building the First Empire. Military conquest is one thing. Holding an empire together is another. Sargon solved this problem in ways that every subsequent empire would imitate. He replaced local rulers with loyal Akkadian governors, his sons, his soldiers, his trusted officials. Previous conquerors had left defeated kings in place as tribute-paying vassals. Sargon understood that vassals eventually rebel. He installed men whose loyalty was to him personally. It was the first experiment in direct imperial administration. He made Akkadian the language of administration throughout the empire. Scribes were trained to write it on clay tablets, alongside Sumerian. For the first time, a single administrative language stretched across a vast territory. Business, law, correspondence, all conducted in one tongue. He built roads, the first known road network in history, and a system of royal messengers who could travel from AKKAD to the frontier in days. Trade caravans moved goods from the Persian Gulf to Anatolia. Economic integration followed military conquest. And in one of history's most remarkable appointments, Sargon made his daughter Enheduanna the high priestess of the moon god at Yor. She composed hymns to the goddess Inanna, passionate, complex, deeply literary hymns that survive to this day. Enheduanna is the first named author in human history. The first person whose name is attached to a surviving literary work. She was a woman, a priestess, a political appointment, and a poet of genius. Chapter 4: A NARAM-SIN, King of the Four Quarters. Sargon's grandson NARAM-SIN pushed the empire to its greatest extent, into the Zagros Mountains, across Anatolia, beyond anything his grandfather had reached. But he did something more audacious than conquest. He declared himself a god. NARAM-SIN was the first Mesopotamian ruler to call himself divine during his own lifetime, writing his name with the divine determinative, taking the title King of the Four Quarters of the Universe, wearing the horned helmet that was the exclusive mark of divinity. In doing so, he was not merely claiming power. He was making a theological argument: if the king rules the world, the king must be divine. His greatest monument, now in the Louvre in Paris, is the Victory Stele of NARAM-SIN, a 2.25-meter slab of pink limestone showing the king striding up a mountain in divine form, crushing enemies beneath his feet, wearing the horned crown. Unlike the static, horizontal registers of earlier Sumerian art, this stele has a dynamic diagonal composition. The king towers over his enemies. He is a force of nature, not a man. He faced, and crushed, a massive coalition revolt, what the texts call the 9 campaigns. But the effort drained the empire's resources. His successors could not hold what he had built. Chapter 5: The GUTIAN Collapse. The collapse of the Akkadian Empire has fascinated historians and scientists for generations. The traditional account, that mountain people called the GUTIAN swept down from the Zagros and destroyed it, is only part of the story. Modern research has identified a severe drought across the Near East around 2200 to 2150 BC, the so-called 4.2 kilo-year event. Archaeological surveys show mass abandonment of Akkadian settlements in northern Syria at exactly this time. A prolonged drought may have starved the empire before the GUTIANs ever arrived. The end, when it came, was swift. NARAM-SIN's son Shar-Kalashari fought desperately to hold the empire together, but four claimants fought each other simultaneously. A later scribe recorded the chaos bitterly. Who was king? Who was not king? The GUTIANs, mountain people dismissed by Sumerian sources as dragons of the mountains who knew no grain, moved into the vacuum. The Akkadian Empire lasted roughly 180 years. It had been the most powerful state the world had ever seen. And yet, within a generation of its collapse, the Sumerian city-states reasserted themselves. The culture outlasted the empire. Sumer had one more great flowering ahead. Chapter 6: The Curse of AKKADE. Within a century of the empire's collapse, Sumerian scribes composed a remarkable poem, The Curse of AKKADE. It is the world's first political poem, and a masterwork of theology and propaganda. The poem tells how NARAM-SIN defied the gods by attacking the holy city of Nippur and its great temple. In response, the gods sent the GUTIANs to destroy AKKAD. The city is cursed so completely that it will never be rebuilt. The prose is extraordinary in its bitterness. Into his city, Nippur, he brought fire. Enlil, because his beloved Ika had been attacked, what had been destroyed he would not restore. The poem was almost certainly composed by Sumerian priests seeking to explain and justify Akkad's fall. It is not objective history. But it tells us something more valuable than facts. It tells us what later Mesopotamians thought about empire, about divine will, and about the limits of human power. The same logic, that an empire fell because its king offended the gods, would appear again and again through ancient history. It shaped the theology of the Hebrew Bible. It provided the template for how ancient people understood catastrophe, not as random misfortune, but as divine judgment. Chapter 7: The Akkadian Legacy. The Akkadian Empire lasted less than 200 years. Yet its legacy shaped the ancient world for the next 2 millennia. Akkadian became the diplomatic language of the ancient Near East for 1500 years. When the Egyptian pharaoh Amenhotep III corresponded with the king of Babylon in the 14th century BC, 1,000 years after the Akkadian Empire, he did so in Akkadian. Every diplomat, every merchant, every scribe who wanted to operate in the ancient world needed Akkadian. The model of empire, direct provincial administration, standardized weights and measures, a postal network, a single administrative language, royal propaganda on monumental steles, was borrowed by every subsequent empire, Babylonian, Assyrian, Persian, and eventually Macedonian. And the myth of Sargon endured. The story of the baby in the basket was still being copied 1,000 years after his death. It influenced the story of Moses. It established a narrative pattern, the self-made man rising from obscurity to rule an empire that has never lost its power. When we encounter Sargon II of Assyria, who appears in the very first part of the World Empires series, conquering Israel in 722 BC, we are meeting a king who chose his throne name deliberately. He wanted to be Sargon the Great, reborn. The original was still that famous, 1500 years later. Chapter 8: Sources and Further Reading. The primary sources for the Akkadian Empire include the Sargon legend and related texts in the electronic text corpus of Sumerian literature at Oxford. The Curse of AKKADE is there too, ETCSL